I'm Cierra Bettens. This is APTN News InFocus. On this episode, Canada is wrapping up its Indian Day School digitization project. What do these records mean for survivors?
Nestled between rugged beaches and the Pacific Rim National Park, the coastal community of Hitasu is home to day school survivor Donna Jack. She's lived all her life in the Ucluelet First Nation on Vancouver Island. In the 1960s, Jack spent 2 years at the Ucluelet Indian Day School, but the details are difficult for her to share.
Suppressing is the worst thing for me. My daughter says that you need to talk about it more because it is all suppressed all my life of just knowing you have to be quiet about things. And that's what we do, is suppress things. We're just going to bury it until it's safe. And I think I've done that all my life.
That was a clip from the APTN Investigate series, Surviving Day School. Between the 1860s and 2000, Canada operated 699 Indian day schools across the country. An estimated 200,000 children attended those schools. The intention was to assimilate Indigenous children into settler Canadian society, stripping them of their cultural practices, knowledge, and identity. Unlike residential schools, students were allowed to return home at the end of the day, but there was still widespread abuse and neglect.
And like residential schools, there are children missing who died during the school year, including 2 of Donna Jack's aunts.
Some sisters that I never knew, she told me the names, and I said, I don't see any graves up here of my mother's family. I see her father's, but I believe they died during the school time. I don't know how or why, but shouldn't they be buried here? If they're from here, that's where everybody is brought home. These people weren't brought home, so no records of what happened to them.
Since 2022, Library and Archives Canada has been digitizing records through the Day Schools project. The $25 million initiative is set to wrap up in March, with a total of 6 million records now digitized. Beth Greenhorn was one of the managers on the project, and she joins me now from Ottawa. Beth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So to start off, I'm curious about how this project got started.
So it's a Treasury Board funded project. We received the funding in 2022, and the project, the first team member was hired in December of 2022. And following that, this was Sarah Herford. She then was tasked to put together a team to create the Day Schools project. So it's really been in operation primarily from 2023 up until now, and it will be concluding sort of officially this week in February 2026, but we'll continue to do tying up of loose ends and finishing some of the work that we weren't able to finish through the month of March.
So why is the digitization of these records so important?
So historically at Library and Archives Canada, these records have always been, researchers have been able to try to search for them, but they've been difficult to search. The majority of records digitized for the Day Schools project were created by the former Department of Indian Northern Affairs and its predecessor departments. So some of these records date back as early as the late 1800s, and they go up until mostly until the 1990s, but some go as late as the 2000s. And in the past, the files haven't been described at this is archival speak, but the file level descriptions have been pretty minimal. So some of them might just have a title, transportation, for example, but it wouldn't necessarily have the name of the school or communities, or the date ranges might, in the past, were generally broader. So what's really important about this project and what it is bringing to survivors, their families, and communities is that, like, through the funding that we received through the Treasury Board, we were able to digitize up to 6 million records. So that's a lot of pages. It constitutes thousands and thousands of files. What the team has been doing over the last couple of years has been flagging records that are relevant to either day schools or other related educational institutions. They've been digitized, and then the day schools team then created enhanced file level descriptions. And what this means is that the files that were digitized through the project now include a lot more information and a lot more detail than they previously was available. So in these detailed enhanced file level descriptions, information includes the type of the communities that were mentioned in a file, what types of documents are contained within a file, or the names of schools, of course. And in some cases, some files can contain up to 50 schools if that many were mentioned. Whether or not there is specialized media, and that means whether or not there were photographs, maps, technical drawings, and in some cases artwork, and also importantly, whether or not students or staff names were mentioned. So this information, we can include the names of students or staff for privacy reasons, but all of the information is fully searchable now through Collection Search, which is LAC's public database.
And so what did the behind the scenes work of digitization look like?
Oh, it's complex. There, as I mentioned, the team digitized just over or nearly 5.8 million pages of records. And finding these records took a number of months. It took, the work of a small team of archivists who are familiar with the former Department of Indian and Northern Affairs Canada collections and files, because the files weren't located all in one place. They were scattered throughout multiple boxes and accessions. So with their expertise and knowledge, they started identifying what areas within the records related to day schools and related educational institutions might be located, ordering those boxes in, flagging those files for digitization, and then sending the files to our Gatineau Preservation Center for digitization. And once we had the digital files, then a group of archival assistants on the team then created the enhanced file level descriptions, which I was just explaining. That includes the names of communities, schools, the types of documents, and whether staff and or students were mentioned in a particular file. And then after that, the files went through a quality assurance just to make sure that the information was as accurate as possible. The files were transferred to our standards officers, who then uploaded the records into the public database. This is the second largest mass digitization initiatives at Library and Archives Canada, but it's one of the most, I would say the most complex project that we've ever undertaken. And it included not only records held in the National Capital Region, so in Ottawa and Gatineau, but it also included records held in our Winnipeg and Vancouver offices.
And so, with these records being more accessible, how will it be easier for, survivors, researchers, anyone looking for this information to find it?
Oh, there's a number of ways. So the one thing that the team did focus on, and this was part of the work that I did, was to create an access strategy. And what that meant was, in addition to the enhanced file level descriptions that contained a lot more detail and information than previously available, we updated the new Day Schools project web pages. So there's an overview about the project, but it also includes a research guide, which provides pretty much step-by-step instructions for researchers on how to access records related to the day schools and their legacy within Collection Search. But I think importantly as well, all of the records that were digitized for the day schools project are now fully searchable, as I mentioned, in the database. And so hopefully survivors will be able to more easily find the records that exist about their school or communities or their families. The records are now fully searchable by school name, community, and other keywords. So that's really important. Having the metadata attached to that really enhances discoverability and accessibility. And I'd say that the more detailed descriptions now will hopefully provide survivors a better idea of what's in the file, and then hopefully give them a better informed idea on whether or not they would like to pursue an access to information request, because that could take a lot of time. We're hoping that with providing better, more detailed file level descriptions, it will just be a time-saving outcome of creating these detailed descriptions, so that hopefully people will be able to zoom in and figure out which records are actually the ones that are of most relevance. The other thing I think that is important as well, not for just survivors, but for the Canadian public, is that the information that we have made available on our database acknowledges that day schools were part of a federally run system, and that we hope that for survivors and accessing records that are of relevance to them will support in truth-telling and validate their experiences.
So one thing that was pointed out was that the digitization project wrapped up after the day school settlement deadline. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on that? And was the team initially trying to get the project wrapped up ahead of that deadline?
Unfortunately, it did. The digitization did start, and we received our funding after that, or just as the class action was wrapping up. Yeah, in retrospect, I wish that it could have started before that to give more survivors access to the records. That might have helped in their claims. I think, maybe, I know that for some of the survivors, that claims period was extended by a little bit of time where they needed to provide more information. So I'm not sure if if they were able to access the records to assist them in that. However, I think, the fact that the records are available now, it's after the class action, but I still think that they do provide hopefully some relevance and for survivors and their family members, that if they do find records that relate to their experiences in one of the day schools, I would hope that might provide some closure and provide some answers that they might be looking into the future.
And what have you heard from survivors themselves about this project and the importance of these records?
I had the opportunity in November of 2025 to speak at an elders gathering at Trent University that was partly organized by Dr. Jackson Pind, who had recently written a book on the Curve Lake First Nation Day School. And well, besides the presentation, I also had the opportunity the following day to help staff an information table where I spoke to a number of survivors or family members trying to, locate the records of their parents or grandparents. And I think at least what I heard was that making the records as accessible and transparent as possible. Majority of records are still restricted by law. If you look at a record and it says code 32, it means that there's personal information contained within that record. It doesn't mean that you can't access it. It just means that you'll need to fill out an access to information or a privacy form to access it. What I heard in my conversations at Trent in November was just the importance of making these records accessible and hopefully, as discoverable as possible. And of course, what I was really happy to be able to do was walk people or the survivors or their family members through the website to at least provide some tips on how to access these records.
So on that note, for my final question, I'm wondering, with this project wrapping up, what's next moving forward, and how will these files and records be managed?
So the records will be available for as long as the website is available, which was really important. I don't know in the near future what's going to happen, but I've worked at LAC since 2003, and there have been multiple digitization initiatives. So my hope is that this is, the beginning of more digitization projects that involve, if not day school records, but other records found in the former Department of Indian and Northern Affairs, because the scope of that department and the administrative scope was huge, and there are literally thousands of records that I think would be of interest and relevance to First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities. The other thing that I'd like to mention is it's not quite ready yet, but in March next month, we're going to be publishing an ebook that will be a companion to the research guide that is on the Day Schools Project webpage. So it's called Documents of a Colonial System, Day School Records at Library and Archives Canada. And this publication, we hope, will give and equip researchers, survivors, their families with more information and a better understanding and context of how to research these records that were created by the former Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. They're complex. They span decades, if not like, as I mentioned, ranging from the 1800s up until the 2000s. So we're hoping that with this booklet, it will give a lot more information and provide a better context for survivors, and hopefully giving them the additional tools that they need to access records of relevance.
Beth, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this project. Really grateful for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Beth Greenhorn is a manager for the Day Schools project at Library and Archives Canada. As a historian studying Indian day schools, settler and Anishinaabe scholar Jackson Pind knows how difficult it can be to locate records. In his book Students by Day, he uncovers the history of the Curve Lake Indian Day School, which operated from 1899 to 1978. Jackson is also an assistant professor of Indigenous methodologies at Trent University, and he joins me now to share more. Jackson, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So to start, I'm curious about what got you interested in studying the history of Indian day schools.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, I would say. Originally, I started looking at the history of day schools right when the kind of TRC reports come out, as the TRC reports talk about day schools quite a bit, actually. So I started kind of looking through some of those files there at that time. And then when I started my PhD at Queen's, I really wanted to focus more on that history. I felt like it wasn't being talked about or studied in many cases across the country. So I really was interested in that as a fact because I knew more students went to a day school than a residential school and their stories weren't being told. So I would say there's kind of a bunch of different factors that led me down, focusing specifically with Curve Lakes Indian Day School that I worked with for the last 8 years or so. But that's what got me started.
And so, how are day schools different from residential schools?
Yeah, so they were really similar in many ways. I always say it's kind of like two sides of a same coin. So they were funded by the federal government and run by the same churches that ran residential schools. But the main difference was that a day school operated on the reserve and students would go during the day, kind of a typical school hours, and then would be able to go home at night. Whereas residential schools were a more boarding type facility, obviously, where students were taken from their homes, usually far away from their reserves, and then would stay at the actual school throughout the whole time of their education. And that was largely the only major difference, I would say, between how they were run, what kind of things were taught in the schools, and the same types of abuses I think still happened at both institutions.
So, when you were doing your research into the Curve Lake Indian Day School, what sorts of challenges did you encounter when you were trying to access records?
Yeah, there was lots of challenges that I encountered. I think the first one was that Library and Archives Canada's website was really, in many ways, outdated. I think they would admit that now as well. And trying to find actual records from the school became kind of a complicated maze in some ways of trying to navigate their web portal at the time. So when I first started doing the research, they had these massive kind of microfilms all kind of organized in different ways online. And the only way you could really access them was going through kind of finding what the name of the school was, which Curve Lakes changed their names a few different times. It was once referred to as the Mud Lake Indian Day School, then the Shamong Lake Indian Day School, and eventually Curve Lake. So just trying to figure out that was kind of a hassle. And then once you came across the files, there's about 10,000 on their website, but you had to go kind of page by page, loading each page each time through like this PDF reader, which became very difficult and time consuming. Obviously, if you're trying to look at a huge amount of years in a small period of time during my PhD. So that was a huge challenge with LAC, and we did some stuff to work with them to try to smooth that process over and make it easier for other researchers that were doing that work, and also survivors who were doing day school investigations for their class action lawsuit. And then the other big challenge was working with some of the churches that were involved in the Indian Day School operation. So, for instance, United Church of Canada, they had this Indian Day School guide, which has now been taken down, but they showed they had over 437 files, I think it is, on Indian day schools and some relating to the Curve Lake Day School. But to get access to those was very challenging. And to this day, we have not been able to get full access to those files, which has been frustrating to say the least. I think the United Church, compared to maybe some of the other churches, is at least a farther ahead. They say on their website that they are slowly digitizing and returning these files back. That hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge, at Curve Lake, but compared to other institutions like the Roman Catholic Church, they have not yet admitted they ran at least 327 Indian day schools across the country. So there's kind of two different challenges, one with the federal government and then also with the different church organization. But most of my experience was with the federal government and trying to help them improve their services that they have for survivors and day school researchers.
You also spoke with day school survivors in your work. What did you hear from them about their experiences at these schools?
Yeah, so there was a wide range of experiences at the day school, really, depending on the teacher and what time they went to the school and how well they did actually academically, it felt like, as well as they went through different levels of the day school in Curve Lake. I spoke to 5 day school survivors in Curve Lake that came forward and wanted to speak to me and felt like they're ready to tell their stories. Of that 5, I would say 4 are very negative, and one was mixed, I would say, opinion about how they experienced the school. They're able to succeed. The one student in particular was able to succeed academically and was able to go on past the day school, which kind of, I think, influenced their understanding of the day school. They still saw it obviously as removing their culture and language, but did give them some other opportunities. But the other 4 had very negative, abusive experiences that they experienced throughout their time in day school, and that followed them throughout the rest of their life. And sadly, now 2 of those 5 have passed away, which is really sad as well. And they were able to kind of recount some of their stories that they experienced in the day school. A lot of, as I said, kind of physical, verbal abuse was very common at a lot of these day schools. They witnessed that or experienced that themselves. And then afterwards, even after they left the school, they found it difficult at times to even go back to the school when their kids were growing up, or even having any kind of connections to education. And then one student as well had a very difficult experience and really credits the day school in some ways of the negative impacts of his life. He kind of immediately, after leaving the school, went into the prison system, and that was also a common experience for a lot of students as well.
So, Library and Archives Canada is now wrapping up its day school record digitization project with, over 6 million records released. What is the importance of this project and of access to records for survivors?
Yeah, I can't stress how important these records are. They represent the bulk of what we know about Indian day schools because so many survivors are passing away right now. And when I first started doing this research, I thought there was only 800,000 files, is what Library and Archives Canada had mentioned and had been digitized and placed online. And now that number has obviously ballooned to over 6 million documents, which is like 6 times the amount of historical information we can now get access to, which I think is really important for us to understanding how the whole system worked and getting to some more of the truth behind what was going on in the operation of the schools across the country. And this was obviously a massive project. I think it was one of their largest projects they've ever undertaken at LAC, which is exciting that there's going to be this much, I think, attention on them, and hopefully that survivors will get access to them. But in some ways, it has been frustrating as well for historians and communities, I think, when they're trying to understand this history, because the class action lawsuit that officially wrapped up last year, you needed actually historical documents in order to get higher levels of compensation, or it helped your case if you had those historical documents. And now that has become too late for those survivors, as well as we're still not sure about the access to some of these documents. Currently, how it works is you need to have kind of your name in the files, or a survivor themselves need to come forward and request them. which is going to be okay right now as survivors become aware of it. But if a community wants to do kind of a full community history like Curve Lake did, or a researcher working on behalf of the community wants to do that research, it's not clear how that process will work yet, as well as some other concerns I think about UNDRIP and access to information and who should actually be the ones owning these records now that they've been digitized. Should it be Library and Archives Canada determining who gets to see them, or should it be the First Nations themselves that were the most impacted, obviously, by them? So it's a good thing overall, I think, but there is also some significant questions about where it could go in the next few years.
Related to that, I'm wondering, where do these records fit within the context of Indigenous data sovereignty? And, how should these records be stewarded and managed?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important questions we can ask right now from LAC, and I think these files in particular would be a very strong example of how records could be handled differently moving forward, especially Indigenous records. We're seeing this massive push across the country for Indigenous data sovereignty. Even the Vatican, like a month ago, returned a lot of the items that were taken from Indigenous communities and return them back to the communities to actually steward them themselves. And I'd really like to see that happen with Library and Archives of Canada, especially files that affect the whole community as well, because sometimes when you do get these files returned, because of access to information and privacy concerns, it will just be one name out of context, right? You might, if you're a survivor yourself, you might have your name shown, but not anything else that's connected to the document, as those things could be redacted based on privacy concerns, which makes it very difficult to fill in your own personal history, but also how your story is fitting within your own community's history as well, and what was going on at that time. So it has, I think, massive ramifications, and I really hope this will be a good example of how LAC can move forward with some of their data sovereignty work. This is just one kind of archival case that I think they're dealing with at this time with a lot of Indigenous records that they hold, but I think it's a really important one for them to consider moving forward in a different way that has been stewarded in the past, and returning these documents to cultural centers and communities and people that can actually steward them in a way that makes sense for their communities, and also those family connections that are really clear throughout all the records that I looked at when I was working with Curve Lake.
So, beyond improving access to records, what else do you think needs to be done to bring justice for day school survivors?
Yeah, I really hope there will be a similar type of TRC type process for day school survivors. That hasn't happened yet. It hasn't materialized post settlement, which happened with the residential school settlement. And I really hope a similar type of process will happen and be launched across the country. Because if we look at an estimated at least 699 Indian day schools, there's only been like a history books written about maybe five, six of them, or historical articles about them. So we need so much more kind of historical information about them to bring about some form of justice for them, and to also place them into context of how these schools were operating at various times throughout the history of Canada, and how they were really in many ways underfunded across this country, and now has led to many problems with Indigenous education today, I think, as a result of this kind of chronic underfunding, which we can see at the Curve Lake Indian Day School, but I think across every single Indian Day School in this country, which was the foundation of Indigenous education for a very long time in this country. And we're slowly trying to change that today. So I think that would be a huge step forward if we can launch this national process. And now that we have these archival documents, and hopefully we can talk to more survivors before they pass away and kind of bring those two archival and oral histories together, I think would be really important.
Well, Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Jackson Pind is an assistant professor of Indigenous methodologies at Trent University and the author of Students by Day, Colonialism and Resistance at the Curve Lake Indian Day School. This episode was produced by Mark Blackburn and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Straker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. We want to know if you're enjoying the show. Please leave a rating and review on your favorite player, or email suggestions to infocus@aptn.ca. Also, give us a follow. It helps other people find the show. I'm Cierra Bettens. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
APTN Investigates delivers impactful, Indigenous-focused stories that change lives and reveal the bigger picture. On this week's show,
I'm Tamara Pimentel. The 2025 wildfires devastated Leaf Rapids, a town already in decline. When the smoke clears, who steps up to help? Find out in Ashes to Ashes.
APTN Investigates. Immediately following APTN National News.